Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session. My name is Annemie Wijkmans of NTNU and of the EERA Joint Program on Smart Cities. And I will be the moderator for this afternoon's session on the clean energy transition for cities. And in this session, we're especially looking beyond technology. Of course, we're going to need technology in order to reach the clean energy transition, but we're especially looking at the interactions between climate neutrality, smart, beautiful, inclusive, resilient, cross-disciplinary and everything else cities in order to reach that net zero goal. And with us this afternoon, we have a range of very exciting speakers from different backgrounds, from policy, from research, from industry, from local authorities, to tell us about their experiences, their priorities and their needs in order to make this happen. And and especially then also how we can join all of these perspectives in order to really accelerate the transition and make it more meaningful and make it, of course, very successful. After the four speakers, we will have a panel discussion. So if you're more than welcome then to ask questions in the chat in writing, we will try to bring these up during the discussion. You're also welcome after each presentation to write questions in the chat directly to a specific speaker. So each presentation will last for more or less 7 minutes. After that, we have 5 minutes for direct Q&A to that speaker. So write your questions in the chat. And then afterwards in the panel discussion, we will ask and have a discussion between all of the speakers. So if you have any questions that address the entire panel, or maybe have some new perspectives, new items you'd like to bring up, please again also do so in the chat. And then we will, of course, try to extract some of the main learnings, some of the main points from the discussion, from the presentations, and summarize these at the end of the session, alongside some steps forward, because of course this is not just a session that we have for information, but this is also one of the steps we take in order to create a joint cooperation that can help us reach the clean energy transition together. Before we start the presentations, we would like to hear a little bit from you. We will ask you for your input using slido.com. If you go to slido.com, either directly in your browser or using the QR code, you can type the reference number 195405. And when you've done so, you will get 3 questions that we'd like to ask you. The first, just a very simple question, hopefully, what is your background? So as we in this session are presenting perspectives from research, academia, policy, industry, and local authorities, we would also like to see whether we have this type of distribution in the audience as well. It will also help us to interpret some of the answers and the feedback we get. So please, if you could be so kind as to answer that question in Slido. Okay, for the time being, this seems to be the distribution. So quite a lot of people from research and academia, but of course, in addition, also then a nice representation by industry, policy, and local authorities. This, of course, is also a good fit with the organization of the session. So the main host of this session is the EERA, European Energy Research Alliance. And of course, we are very interested in how research could support the policy, industry, and local authorities development as practice drivers of transition. and the different roles, the different content, methods, stakeholders, etc., that could be involved. I think we can go to the next question then. All of us are already working with the clean energy transition, urban transitions at different levels in our daily work. Most of us are spending quite a lot of time on this and have been doing so for quite some time as well, in different roles. We would be very interested to hear from you. If there's one thing that you think could be done differently in society to accelerate the clean energy transition in cities, what would it be? Because, you know, we also know IPCC report, Code Red, we are doing a lot. It's not enough. It's not going fast enough. It's not anchored enough in society. We need more stakeholders. We need a broader, so not just technology. We need a good balance between the irresistible, beautiful technology, stakeholder engagement, resilience, nature-based solutions, transformation of built environment, all of these at the same time within these urban environments and also rural environments that we already have. So what is that one thing that you think should be changed, or maybe even, you know, should be emphasized more in order to accelerate? And as we see, there's a couple of words that seem to come up quite strongly. It's also, it's a very nice diversity of answers, so that's also good. And most of them fit really well with the scope of this session. Of course, there's also quite a big diversity in, you know, some of them are fairly easy to engage in ourselves as our organizations in our professional work. Others are big systemic changes at a macro level, national, European levels that might take a little bit of time. But of course, yes, it is very important to address all of these, both in the shorter and the longer term. So thank you very much for these answers, and we will take them with us going forward. Now, a last question to you would be, with all of these things that we obviously think should change, what is it you, as a professional, could do differently to progress, to accelerate the clean energy transition in cities? Because there are obviously some things, yes, again, that need to change at a systemic level that others should be doing. But what is that one thing that you would really like to do, maybe in cooperation with some of the other people in this session? Good. Interaction with peers, that's what this session is all about, and that we hopefully will take forward afterwards. Discussion, work less in silos. Yes, quite a lot of different things. Continuous learning, of course, as well. And in different types of both buildings, infrastructures, energy, technologies, mobility, more or different mobility, less, well, more electric mobility, less fossil fuels, different habits. Indeed. Yes, that's also quite a big list. Good. Thank you for this. We'll also, again, we'll keep it for the way forward, and we'll also make it available to you afterwards, in case you would like to take another look at it afterwards, or would you like to use it in a different setting for going forward. Sure. Thank you very much. Then we would like to move on to the first speaker, which will represent the policy perspective. We have Georg Houben from DG ENERGY, Smart Cities and Communities, on the clean energy transition for climate neutral, smart and beautiful cities and communities. So the European perspective. Georg, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Hello, everyone. So, I think I need the allowance to share my screen, obviously. So let me check. That looks good. So here we go. So you should now see the first slide, which is in a way showing a model city, or maybe not. So let me start. Quickly switch to my presentation. So here we go. What I'm going to give you in a very brief presentation, which cannot cover all the aspects of this excellent session, of course, just a bit of this and that. Now, why are cities so important, specifically smart cities, climate neutral cities? Well, they do represent 75% of the EU's population. That's the #1 argument, sort of beating them all in a way. So I'm using it all over the place because it's still true, and it will become even more true in the future because urbanization is an ongoing process. So when it comes to climate neutrality for Europe or the rest of the planet, cities or urban or conurbations are really the places to look at. They also deliver, of course, on GDP, jobs, growth, resilience, investments, you name it. They are at the forefront of many, many pivotal issues. The most recent one we all suffered from is COVID-19. So cities are really at the center of the action in a way. This is not, I have to say this is not scientifically totally accurate, but it's based on observations I made. And what you see here is pretty much the role of the various participants in the urban context. We have here the society, the big green circle in the middle. That's pretty much everything. So all the stakeholders who are connected to or live in cities. Then we have the cities, meaning the city administrations, actually, which I would believe are the main drivers of change. Since they are in a somewhat bivalent role, they face the respective city society, but they also face the market. They push the need-driven agenda, which is ideally based on a vision or a plan, a long-term plan. Then we have the businesses, the big ones, industry, but also the small ones, SMEs and startups. And there you already have an interesting tension field between big industry, which is providing standardized solutions and therefore being perceived as low risk or lower risk, and the SMEs and startups, which are much closer to the actual need, which can really bring tailor-made solutions to the respective city context. Then let's say on the other end, we have the financing community, the banks, the investors, which exactly look at the industry as lower risk and distinct in terms of solution provision. And then we have the innovative end, which is the SMEs and startups, which really provide the tailor-made and integrated solutions, which are really made for the local context. And then we have research, and that is not meant in any way as a judgment or something. Research, based on my experience, is actually adding knowledge and experience and essential best practices and takeaways to all the three areas. So research is quite essential, but it's not a driver per se, according to my humble experience in this field. Let's move on. So just bringing this slide up, this is actually to show you that the EU support to the city context is quite vast and massive. And the total package we have currently have is 1.8 trillion, including everything which is on this slide. And there is a good number of initiatives and activities which directly support the urban context. And quite some of those, even though they are not directly connected to the urban context, can be to benefit or beneficial for cities and communities and towns. Next one. Yeah, this is just another slide showing how vast the landscape is on EU level when it comes to initiatives and support activities. We used to have Horizon 2020, now we have Horizon Europe, and then we have a number of other activities. I've just mentioned a few on this slide, but the landscape, as already said, is much bigger than this. Now, finally, when speaking about Horizon 2020, about Horizon Europe as well, and also looking at the mission on climate neutral and smart cities, we had some forerunner projects in the past over almost a decade, which we call the Lighthouse Projects. Now, these projects delivered more than 500 solutions actually in more than 180 places or sites across Europe. We have more than 120 cities involved in this massive program. And of course, we aim to build on that and to really harvest that knowledge for bringing it to the fingertips of city stakeholders, of the city administrations, but also specifically speaking about the small and medium-sized cities in this context. And then, of course, this was funding, and now we talk about financing. The Smart Cities Marketplace, for which I'm responsible, this has a dedicated so-called matchmaking process, which actually looks into what's available, really the best practices, the blueprints for projects, the knowledge, but really the practical knowledge, the purposeful knowledge, bringing that to the fingertips of stakeholders who are interested in launching projects in the smart city context, climate neutral projects, whatever type. And then in the third stage, which we call the deal stage, we try bringing those projects at a decent maturity level, of course, to the attention of our own investor network. And this way, we have already matched roughly 130 projects with the interest of our investors at a magnitude of 600 million euro. And of course, this activity is going to continue. And we are now seeking to really improve it even more so that it is really tailor-made to fit with the ambitions of, for example, the mission on smart and climate neutral cities, or the renovation wave, or even the new European Bauhaus, which you might have heard of. And that's pretty much it from my end. I'm very happy to join later on in the discussions, hear your questions, and hopefully I'll be able to answer a few of those. So back to Annemie. Thanks for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Georg. Those were very impressive numbers. We don't have questions yet in the chat. So if anyone has a question now specifically to Georg based on the presentation, we have a couple of minutes for this. In the meantime, I noticed that when you presented industry, so you separated between industry standardized and then the tailor-made, let's say more SME startups, etc. And then, of course, you mentioned, the smart cities marketplace, the mission, the platforms that are going to support this. Do you have any specific activities then to get more of these SMEs and startups on board? Because, we in other discussions, we've heard that sometimes for small, not just small cities, but also small companies, organizations, it can be very difficult to connect to this.
Yeah. Well, there is one project, if I may say so, in the pipeline, and I can't reveal too many details of that, but we are at the moment preparing an action, which is pretty much like the Covenant of Mayors helps cities to commit to climate neutrality. We have something in the pipeline which is doing a bit the same, a pilot action, if you want, which is looking into a bit the same kind of area, but specifically for businesses, and there with a slight emphasis on SMEs and startups. So really trying to also tackle climate neutrality and the clean and just transition also from the perspective of companies. There, of course, again, for the same reason, with an emphasis on, yeah, let's say smaller businesses, SMEs or startups, because they quite usually struggle most when it comes to these, let's say, extra effort of becoming climate neutral or doing stuff for the just and clean transition.
Sure, thank you. We do have a couple of more questions in the chat. I don't think we can answer all of them right now, but maybe you could just answer them in the chat later. But maybe a quick one is that, of course, the new European Bauhaus is, a big initiative from the European Commission to support also both the missions, and then, of course, it was included in our title, so to make things irresistible, beautiful, inclusive, etc. So of course it's two sides of the same coin. One, if you could just quickly say something about this, and the second is this is not just Europe, obviously this is also relevant for the rest of the world. How do you see that connection?
I try to give a proper and complete answer to that. Now, for the new European Bauhaus, you already said it, it's another side of the same coin. So really tackling the sort of climate neutral or more livable cities from a different angle, which is beautiness, inclusiveness, design. To be honest with you, I mean, when we look into the Lighthouse projects, many of those already tackle issues which are relevant for the Bauhaus plan or Bauhaus idea. Because quite frankly, if you want to go about an integrated plan, which is, for example, tackling energy, mobility, and maybe some digital solutions and integrate that in the cityscape, you really need to engage in a very meaningful and fair way with your citizens. So in a way, what the Bauhaus is postulating was already, while not headlining, already partly tackled by the Lighthouse. So that's something which is very relevant. And of course, let's say from the smart cities marketplace and smart cities and communities perspective, there is of course an interest to support that, with maybe also the matchmaking in the future, so that projects are not only funded, but maybe even financed to support that initiative. Then the other question you asked on international, I think we can say the following. What we do here on European level is, of course, taking sort of the European approach, since it's, for example, if you take the Smart Cities Marketplace or the Lighthouse projects, these are European projects. But of course, Europe is not sort of, isolated in terms of climate neutrality. So if we talk about, for example, the EU Green Deal, then this will have an impact on the planet and the whole world as well. So if we support the Green Deal, and if we sort of reach out to international partners to share our knowledge in order to influence projects in other parts of the world, and maybe even create opportunities for European businesses and banks to get involved in international business, then this is, I guess, a quite promising, let's say, perspective. And to this end, I'd say, yeah, we are very much interested in also getting involved in the international scene here. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, I think it does. And you even answered an additional question very briefly on a link between the Smart Cities Marketplace and the city's mission through the matchmaking and the investments. And yes, so we know that several of the Lighthouse projects already, so the solutions, the ways of working are already met with interest in, India, Africa, Central Asia, etc. So even if it was not planned originally, that kind of transfer, replication, scaling happens in practice as well. So that would definitely be something to follow up on as well. But I think that's the time we have for now. So thank you very much. If you see any other, there's a question on definitions. I'll leave it up to you whether you want to answer that in the chat or no. Otherwise, of course, there is more than enough information also on your website available. So maybe it's possible to also just add a link to the work you've been doing to answer some of these questions if you want.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for the presentation and the answers, and we'll get back to you then in the panel discussion.
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we move on to the next speaker, which will be Adel El Gammal, the Secretary General of EERA, so the European Energy Research Alliance. And he will speak about the holistic approach for cities and communities, again, also to lead to and to accelerate the clean energy transition. Adel, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Annemie. So good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm just wondering how I can control the presentation. Do I have? Yes, okay, I have a control. Thank you very much. So yes, I'm going to give maybe some global perspective on how to approach the transition challenge, of course, in the framework of cities. But first, I would like, I think, it's very important, given the fact that the IEA has released its World Energy Outlook report a few days ago, just to remind a little bit where we stand. And in fact, do I have the control? I don't think, no. Okay, yeah. So it's very important to see that, in fact, if we look at the current trend, it is absolutely catastrophic. And if we forget about just the drop of 6% that we had because of the COVID pandemic, there is, of course, a huge rebound now, but we are really in trajectory to increase emissions. If we look at the current pledges, and this is out of the WEA report, since Paris, it just leads to, you know, flattening the emissions, but or slightly decreasing them. But this is absolutely nothing, I would say, which is compatible with the net zero that we want to achieve globally by 2050. And let us all recall that this is a threshold to limit global warming by 1.5 degrees, which is considered by scientists now as the limit after which we don't know what will happen, basically. So Glasgow pledges, which are expected to arrive, will only decrease by another 20%. So altogether, if we considered that all the pledges would be implemented timely and as they were defined, we're still falling short of more than 40% of the emissions by 2050. This is really saying that, first of all, the situation is not at all connected with the level of the pledges, because in reality, emissions continue to grow, and that the pledges themselves, even if they are very optimistic, fall really short of what we need to avoid climate change. So this is just to show the seriousness and the emergency of the situation. If we move to the next slide, I just wanted here to try to give an idea of the size of the challenge at hand. And if you look at the graph on the left-hand side, both are from the IEA. It shows that in 2020, for the first time since the crisis of 2008 and then World War II, the emissions have dropped. They have dropped by, that's an estimate by the IEA, a little bit less than 6% last year. We should realize that this was the result of having almost our complete economy at a standstill for a year. And the drop was just 6%. If I now look at the graph on the right-hand side, well, you see the drop represented at 2020. This represents the graph of the net zero path scenario of IEA. If you look at the figures, I've made the calculations. Between 2020 and 2030, we need to reduce emissions by a bit more than 5%. And then afterwards by 11%, because we often forget that if you are decreasing emissions linearly, in fact, in terms of the contribution you have to do each year, it increases because the base from which you depart is smaller. So it means basically that just if we look at the next 10 years, we will need to have the equivalent of change as what has happened in the COVID year last year for 10 years continuously, year on year cumulatively. And then afterwards, it should be the double. So it's just to let everyone imagine what it represents to reduce global emissions to net zero, or even by 5% a year. It's just enormous. And so this is to say that it will not be achieved by marginal measures. It will not even be achieved by incremental measures. It needs to be achieved by radical measures. So let's have a look at how we can achieve that. And this is in essence the methodological framework that EERA is presenting to analyze, model and drive the clean energy transition in Europe. And the whole idea is that you should look at the transition not only from the perspective of adding renewable technologies to the base, but you need to look at where the emissions originate and then try to understand how you can globally zero the emissions. This doesn't mean that you need to zero them everywhere, but if you have still remaining emissions somewhere, you need to have a carbon sink elsewhere. And this is very important because most of the exercises that are done today are done for sector or technology in isolation. We say wind can deliver this, solar can save so many gigatons of CO2, steel can reduce by so much, but nobody makes the full calculation. And so what we say in the recommended approach is that we need to first take a global view to the transition and to look at all the sectors. It's absolutely essential because we can only achieve net zero if we look at how emissions are transmitted from one sector to another, and everybody is playing to push away the emissions to the other sectors to say, well, I'm carbon neutral, but in fact the emissions are just displaced. But also there is a lot of opportunities that we can leverage by looking at cross-sectoral opportunities. And just if you think about hydrogen, to name it, this is obviously a technology which can increase very much this cross-sectoral approach because it links definitely between the heat and power sector, the industry, to a certain extent the buildings, certainly transportation, and also the land use, agriculture and forestry, because hydrogen is one of the key components of ammonia, which is used for fertilizers. So everything is interconnected and we should look at it as a whole. Then to really design transition scenarios across the sectors, we need to study these scenarios across a number of themes which are represented there. And this is very important because you see that the themes which are described there are really things which are shaping basically or the model of our society. Well, digitalization is probably the only very technological one. Everybody understands how it will affect the transition. But if I look at the others, circularity and efficiency is really absolutely fundamental. And even more than that is the concept of sufficiency, which is to say that we need to think about services, what energy brings as services, and how we can substitute the same services by lower energy content alternative. An example of sufficiency is efficiency would be to replace an old elevator by a new one which is consuming less. Sufficiency would be to replace the elevator with a staircase, for instance. Sector coupling, I have already evoked that. Now, of course, what is extremely important is that the market alone will not drive the transition, and that is This is very clear because we see on the one hand that even though solar and wind are highly competitive, they only represent a marginal component of the global energy mix worldwide. More than that, if we need to go to net zero, the IEA report states that approximately 40% of the emission reduction will be done in a competitive way, but 60% will be by implementing technologies which are not competitive according to the current market rules. So we need to reconsider the market designs, and we need also strong regulation to override what market would prescribe, but to make it fit with the reality of the pathways we need to follow. And finally,
Adel,
yeah.
could you wrap up, please, because
I'm
have
wrapping
passed
up.
7 minutes.
And
Thank you.
finally, it's very much about thinking non-linear in the sense that everything that we do now is marginal compared to the current model we have, whereas we need to jump into another model. So I think we already discussed about the importance of cities, so I will not come back to this point, just to say that cities are a perfect environment to test new ways and new societal models. And I would finish just to inform you and to invite you to join a major conference that we're holding next week on the 20th of October on hybrid mode, which is about precisely looking at this transition model. So I thank you very much. And for the questions session, I think we're going to have a poll, which will maybe drive some further thinking. So thank you very much. And we go to the first question.
Please, Adel, feel free to introduce it, to introduce the question.
Sorry, Louisa?
Feel free to introduce the question.
You want me to introduce the question? Okay, very good. So, yeah, you will have a question on local government, on national government, and on EU government. And the idea is really to see where you think the action is the most appropriate. So expect to have the same question on national and EU government. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think so. Generally, it's quite mixed, but we see clearly that there's a majority thinking that local government action is not sufficient, although it's mitigated, I would say, and that is not surprising because we think that cities and local government are typically probably the most active in that field. Okay, so let's move to the next one, which is the same question, but when we look at the national level, so if you think about the countries, and probably not your country, but we look at EU countries in general. I'm not really surprised. Okay, we'll leave it up another 20 seconds. Okay, so 60% think it's not adapted, and the rest of people believe it's somehow adapted, but I don't think it's very positive. So here, I mean, the two first show that clearly there's a preference for local government actions, and now we have the question at the EU level, considering, of course, keeping in mind the EU Green Deal and the climate flow. Do we think that EU policies are addressing consistently and coherently the climate challenge? Well, that's very interesting. I leave another couple of seconds, but it's very interesting because this shows, in fact, it's a quick conclusion here that we might challenge in the chat, but it shows that people tend to be generally more or less okay with local governments and cities, very positive about the EU initiatives, but quite skeptical about how the member states and associated countries implement these into their home countries. So I think this is a quite clear message. And the last one I think is very interesting. It's how do you feel that people are well informed about the challenge, the climate challenge and the energy transitions. And I think this links very much to the first poll where education appeared as one of, or if not the most important dimension. Well, very interesting. Oh, I see some positive signs here, but limited. Okay, so we see here that 66, or 2/3 of people say it's not adapted. 1/3 believe, well, yes and no, but very few people are positive about that. So clearly, we believe that information, communication, and education are still a very, very weak point into the global picture. So I think we'll end up the poll here, and I don't know if we have time for 1 or 2 comments on these first outcome.
I would suggest, Adel, that we keep these comments for the panel discussion. Yes,
okay, very good.
I made a note of them, so we can open with it in the panel discussion.
Excellent.
Yes.
So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to join you back at the panel session.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the poll. Then we move to the next speaker, Lucienne Krosse of InnoEnergy, Smart Buildings and Cities. And she will talk about the development and market uptake of innovative products and services to lead to the acceleration of the clean energy transition in cities. Lucienne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Annemie. Can I have the next slide, please? Or do I have control? Okay, we start with a question, a poll question, and basically my question is, what is in your opinion critical for successful market uptake of new products and services that enable climate neutral, smart and beautiful cities? And clearly there's no wrong answer because, well, everyone can answer from their own perspective. Understanding benefits, price, financial incentives. A lot is financial oriented. Communication, education, transparency, accessibility, communication. Easy to use. Motivation. Really interesting answers. It started with just economical incentives, cost related, so the financial objective, and now really the integration aspects are coming into it. Motivation, really important, and transparency. I didn't expect transparency, but I'm really glad to see that one back. And heart and soul. I would like to have this slide. Okay, may move on to the presentation and then may get back during the panel discussion to this slide. Okay, well, let me shortly start with quickly explaining who we are and what we do, because very often people don't know who we are, or at least don't know who InnoEnergy is. We were founded in 2010 with a mission coming from the European Commission: accelerate sustainable energy innovations and bring them faster to the market. So we do that in 4 main business lines or main activities. One is addressing education, and one of the points mentioned on the slide already, basically adding entrepreneurship modules to master programs of well-known universities. We are developing and putting in the market professional learning, so basically modules for reskilling people to enter new businesses or new industries. The third one, innovation. We are investing in product developments together with international consortia. Very important for us is that there's always one partner in the lead, and that's the commercializing partner, because that's really the one who should lead and is the guarantee for success. And the last one, and that one is really new, that is setting up industrial value chains. And that's something we do in just very special cases where we see a market opportunity that cannot be crossed by just one single startup or company. We set up this value chain. Examples are the European Battery Alliance. We started organizing that one in 2018 to bring back or to create a European battery industry. Newer ones are the European Green Hydrogen Acceleration Center, the EGAC. It started just early this year with the focus on green hydrogen. And the last one, the European Solar Initiative, the focus is to reshore the PV industry back to Europe, because most innovations are coming from Europe. And since we already started in 2010, by now we are one of the biggest energy accelerators globally, with investments in more than 300 startups that are selling and thus on the market. Next slide, please. Now going back to climate neutral, smart and beautiful cities. On the right-hand side, I mapped some of our investments that contribute to this objective, and more specifically to renovation. And as you can see, most are product oriented and with a very specific reason. For startups, focus and a clear market strategy are essential. So if you want to innovate at multiple levels at the same time, it's perceived as more risky, meaning it will be much harder to find the necessary capital to grow your business. It was also mentioned by Georg, especially linked to the bigger industrials, but we see this is really important for startups as well. Examples of two startups that are not component or system focused are Bondusa in the Netherlands and EOS in Spain. Both offer turnkey renovation solutions as a one-stop shop approach. In these cases, the innovation is business model related, although they also deploy innovative products. They are not developing them themselves. So again, this is related to risk. Developing technology and innovating the business model at the same time is lots of risk and liabilities. So it's better to really organize a very credible and strong supply chain of innovative technology, but also mature technology, and innovate the business model and focus on implementing this business model. And that's already pretty challenging as it proves to be. The next slide, please. Of course, renovation is not the only challenge for creating energy districts or cities. Newly built districts are also still a challenge. One of the companies we invested in a few years ago is Eva House in Germany. And basically what they do is they develop the complete concept from design to operation for the affordable, lower and middle incomes. And what they do, they don't develop technology. It's again the business model, and the system level is the complete district. Since they designed it and are also active in the operation, they were able to integrate the inhabitants and to use their feedback and give them benefits during the operation phase. So that's enabling them to keep the energy consumption at the lowest possible level, because the inhabitants get the rewards as well. And this was the trigger to make the complete business model affordable for the lower incomes. Otherwise, it would have been impossible because the technology was too expensive. And on the right-hand side, I will not go into details. The customer journey is depicted of one Duurzaam. And it started really as a tailor-made startup in the Netherlands. They standardized the lead intakes and everything to a high level, and now they are ready to go international. So they are planning to go to Austria actually in 2022. Next slide, please. So what makes a startup successful, at least in our opinion? For sure, we don't have the magic recipe, but we do know some of the key ingredients, and one is scalability, because size matters if you want to be successful. And scalability is not just one parameter, it's composed out of a set of indicators. And there are different methodologies, but the methodology that we use to evaluate scalability or the potential scalability of a startup is based on well-known tools. And we made a new function out of it, and we call it the innovation readiness level. And it's a function of the technology readiness level, the market readiness level, commercial readiness level, and the societal readiness level. And the moment you reach the upper level of all of them, then all the ingredients are available to become successful. And there's a huge matrix behind it with a lot of metrics in it. But to make it a bit more accessible, we created a picture as shown in the right corner. And the main parameters where we focus on helping startups to grow is, of course, market intelligence. You need to know the market, and there needs to be a market demand. Technology, the technology needs to be finished and reliable. So pilot after pilot after pilot is destroying your business. Regulation, permitting. How does the business look like? Is regulation coming up and really favorable for your business? Or are there lengthy permitting procedures really hampering scaling up, especially for district level and going across borders? That this is a real item. The most important one of everything is the team behind it. If there's not an excellent team with a clear vision and a shared vision, then it will not work. Even if all the other parameters are at the best level, the team makes the difference. Customers or the off-takers, of course, essential. If there's no customer signing up from the early start, then you will be in big trouble. Social and environmental acceptance, it's not as important for all our investments, but especially for the investments related to cities and buildings. This is one of the key elements. If there's for some reason the perception that it's not sustainable or too expensive or low quality, it's hard to scale. Industrialization and standardization. For scalability, really important items. Normally, startup starts with a tailor-made solution, but the moment they really want to grow, they need to standardize. Otherwise, it takes too much effort to grow. Supply chain, important to organize it, to have a good supply chain management, and nowadays even more important than well before COVID. Because every startup and probably every bigger company as well, they are struggling to get their supply in place at the right time and at the right cost. Governance, is everyone aligned, or is the founder of a company still the decision-making item for everything? That will destroy your scalability as well.
Lucienne, can you wrap up, please?
Yes. So my summary in this case is scalability. It's a system approach and a mindset. And in the end, what is crucial? To have the excellent team, a good plan, a good execution, and timing, really good timing. And the timing for sustainable solutions is now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucienne. And I'm sure that there would be a lot of questions, linking to the last slide you showed on the innovation readiness level. And let's hope it shows up quite soon, in different frameworks as well. I don't see any direct questions in the chat to you right now. I am going to, in the panel discussion, I'm going to ask you to reflect on the connection between what you just showed, the innovation readiness level, the scaling, and then the answers you got on the market uptake, including transparency and heart and soul, etc. So that's something you could, start to think about. I'm warning you up front. In the meantime, thank you very much for the presentation. I hope we can also make it available to all of the participants. I'm sure there's a lot of follow-up questions afterwards. But first, we're going to the fourth speaker and the last speaker for today, Charlotte Spörndli of EEA. She's the General Manager of the European Energy Awards. And Charlotte, you're going to talk about bringing science closer to citizens, and especially then from the perspective of medium and small-sized towns and cities. Charlotte, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Anne. I'm very happy to share with you today a bit also the perspective of the local authorities and how we as European Energy Award try to support this link between new technologies, new solutions, and the local authorities or even the citizens in the end. But before we start, we also start with a question for you actually. And you can just start answering it. We'll go into my presentation afterwards and we'll look at the results in the end. So I would be curious to know from your point of view, be it any perspective you have, for which type of projects or new solutions would you see the biggest need for a collaboration or cooperation between research, innovation, academia, and the city or local authority level? So I just leave this question like this, and we'll already start with the presentation. Please, my first slide, and then we'll come back to look at the results. So I also would like to start with who we are, as I imagine most of you probably aren't familiar with the European Energy Award. We are actually a bottom-up initiative from cities and then also countries. You can see them here in darker blue, the countries that have been participating already since 20-30 years. That the initiative actually started 30 years ago in Switzerland, and how it is growing now also into pilot cities more in Central and Eastern Europe. And we are already today covering around 1,700 local authorities that are participating in the initiative. As I said, it's really bottom up. Our strong level is the national level. On an international level, we are rather trying to keep it a bit together, to develop in the same direction. We have a common tool, but the strong level is the national level, and you can also see this here in the names. For example, it's a bit confusing. Our program is called differently in all the different nations, only called in Germany and on international level European Energy Award. There are the different names, how it is called in the different nations. That's because we also think local authorities, and mainly maybe the smaller ones, they feel much more at home in a national program, also in their own language, than sometimes in a European program, which is working in English, for example. On the next slide, we can also see that we can cover the full, that the municipalities participating in the European Energy Award, they are really small and big ones. We really have tiny villages with just some hundreds inhabitants and medium-sized cities, and actually just a few bigger cities, because we also feel that the need from small and medium-sized cities or even villages is probably sometimes bigger than from the very big cities that can cope a bit better on their own sometimes with all these new challenges that are coming up because they have own staff, etc. basically the European Energy Award, and that's on the next slide, is a quality management system in the field of energy and climate policy. So we really try to take the local authority by the hand and lead them towards a circle of continuous improvement, and we won't let them go once they're in the program. We really have cities that are in the program for 30 years now, and they keep on going. And we try to focus on elements that makes, for example, if they have developed action plans, that they don't end up in any drawers and are not being used, but that we develop elements which make implementation happen. So we ask them, for example, to have an interdepartmental team in their cities where they discuss all these actions. They are always coached by an external accredited EA advisors, which again also brings in, of course, ideas and know-how, so that they are not left alone. And then I come back to this. Our core instrument is actually what we call our EA catalog of measures, which is adapted nationally and where there's an enormous amount of ideas in there, and which we also use in the end for benchmarking between them. Then this EA advisor goes visiting the local authorities yearly. So to follow up, to monitor, is something happening? Are projects being implemented? What's new? What should be taken up in the action plans? And that's even audited every 4 years, what they have done. And in the end, they get this award. But actually, the award is not the main thing we're aiming at. That's just a bit of the motivation. Next slide. And just to show you a bit where we are active, in which fields, areas of activity, you can see here we are very holistic. We really try to cover the full range there's full scope of action of local authorities, starting from their very own scope of action, like the communal buildings, urban planning, but also going into fields where they more have a role of facilitator. Or then we really also ask them, that's one full area, to really communicate and cooperate with all their stakeholders on their territory, their citizens, but also businesses, house owners, industries, whatever it's on their territory, they shall interact and to involve them in this whole process. Next slide. So having a closer look at this core instrument I talked about, so it's 60, 70 measures which are international harmonized. So it gives a very structured approach again. And as I will look at some examples there, it's really specific sort of proposals of what they could do in order to improve their performance, in order to get closer to their targets. So it really, and this is also the place where, for example, the national level can say, okay, I have now an innovative solution developed in our country that's available, that's fit for the market. I would like to push that. So that can be written into this catalog as an idea or even more. And then the advisors, as they visit municipalities every year, they take this message along. And that's actually a great instrument also to disseminate new technology and say to the municipalities directly, hey, look here, here and here and here, there are new technologies available. They have proven successful in other cases. Why don't you try it as well in your local authorities? Next slide. So here just some examples going into this direction of cooperating, also starting actually also with internal organization already there in this interdepartmental EA or climate team, which is of course composed of administrative and political staff of the administration. But we also ask them to include, for example, citizens or other stakeholders like academia in this committee already that really decides on the activities to be done in the local authority. Then, as I mentioned, under this area 6, we ask them to cooperate, for example, with universities and research. That's one full measures, which is then described in more detail on where they could cooperate with. We asked them to set up working groups to really have this participation of citizens in the decision-making process. I didn't mention school here. That would be another measure under 6.2. So that also in education, for example, the topic comes up. We try to look at multipliers, specifically in the specific context of a local authority, who are the main multipliers, and try to deliver messages through these multipliers. So that's really how we try to transfer all these messages from an EU level through the national level down then to the local level. Next slide. Just to finish off with my presentation with some more concrete examples, very, very briefly here, for example, again, from this climate team, the EEA team in Luxembourg, they have set up a new catalog of measures where they specifically ask to also involve, for example, young people, that they say, okay, we really want a systematic involvement of them also in the team, and additionally also on a project level. That's just one example of, on a national level, they can also put down their priorities. And then next slide.
Charlotte, can you start to wrap up, please?
Yeah, actually, we'll go to the slide after the other. We'll skip that one and just go to the last slide. So I wanted to show you some concrete examples of where also it is happening, this collaboration between research and local authorities. I tried to look for examples, but I ended up actually writing down mainly all the areas we have, as I saw examples from all these different areas. So I really think that there's a potential to collaborate in this full scope of action of municipalities. It's really, I think what we have to improve is that they find each other, and that good practices from one place are transferred to other places, that it can be replicated in other local authorities. So that's it for me. Yes, okay, so now we'll go back to the results of the question, and let's see what your ideas were. I see here smart mobility. Mobility is a very typical area, I think, as well, where I found many examples. Citizen involvement, I think that's a general topic for all different fields. And I think it's basically the same image I got, that the areas are very wide. Basically, it's possible in the full scope of action of local authorities to look for collaboration with research. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. Sorry, I was looking at the results of the Slido as well. Yes, so there's a lot of work to do, and thank you very much for presenting this as well. I don't see any immediate questions to you, but Charlotte, let's start with you for the discussion. A lot of the things you presented now, I would imagine also naturally fit really well within that European mission on climate neutral and smart cities, and the platforms that are supporting it. Could you say a little bit about how you see that cooperation, and maybe if even the mission and all of the mechanisms around it could somehow boost the work you've been doing for quite some time?
Yes, we are also collaborating with the Smart Cities Marketplace. We are also leading one of these subgroups of a cluster. And what we see again there, that it's often, I mean, directly, it's usually bigger cities getting involved in these EU level discussions. What we are there again trying to take out, maybe as an organization, of what we see there, of solutions coming up, solutions being experienced, and really bring it down to this very local, maybe level of smaller municipalities. Because we don't see that in the end that they will really participate in a EU level dialogue. That's very rare to see. So we are really trying to fill in this role of tackling it down to the very, very local level.
Thank you. Yes, and that is so both to get it not just to bigger cities, but also to small, medium-sized cities, maybe also at the outskirts of Europe, but also all the European policies, the big strategies, how you translate them to on-the-ground local context. That is, of course, a big challenge, of course, already for a big city, but even for smaller cities. So I could imagine that also regional cooperation. I noticed that in some regions of Europe, you have, a lot of participation around this. In other areas, I noticed nothing in the Nordics, for example. So do you also encourage cities to cooperate within their region, for example, to share resources and share knowledge?
Sure. That's also mainly also for the very, very small municipalities. That's always an option to group together on a regional level, or also this exchange of experience they have that might not even be on a national level, but even on a smaller level, on this regional level where they group together and exchange. We also tried, for example, to summarize a lot of learnings from the Smart Cities Marketplace in this Smart Cities Guidance Package, it's called. It's a publication from, I think, 2 years ago, where we try to summarize it, and which is also sort of a living document, which will go on feeding, where we try to summarize this experience, which is available also to any municipality in Europe, on how they could sort of start a process in their municipality on going towards this direction of smart and carbon neutral city.
Absolutely, yes. Georg, as the Smart Cities Marketplace has been mentioned several times and referred to, do you have some feedback on this? So the challenges have been mentioned several times, how to get this knowledge, this experience, not just to big cities, but also to smaller, medium-sized one, maybe support also regional cooperation. How do you translate the big strategies and policies into something on the ground, and how do you then learn from what happens on the ground and bring it back towards these big policies and strategies? I'm sure you're already working with that. I think it would be very interesting for other people to know.
Well, unfortunately, there's no one-size-fits-all solution for this. I think what we are really trying on a daily basis is truly to harvest the knowledge of, well, for us, of course, the first and most prominent asset is, of course, the 18 Lighthouse Projects. That's nearest, if you want, in terms of contacts, in terms of collaborations and so on. But of course, it would be great if we could make a link to all the other excellent initiatives. I mean, we have the EERA here, but we also have, for example, Living in EU, we have Civitas, the Intelligent Cities Challenge, and so on. So really, I think what the focus of the marketplace is really here to very clearly pick those ideas and blueprints, if I may say so, which we can then easily make ready for a market, for other stakeholders who want to pick them up, maybe replicate or implement those in different towns or cities or communities. And here again, the emphasis on small and medium-sized cities. I think what we can do in the next term, there is a number of ideas looking into how the marketplace operates right now. One idea is, of course, going more local. So really making sure that what is provided in terms of knowledge, stories, guidance, and thanks, by the way, Charlotte, for mentioning the Smart City Guidance Package. I think that was an excellent piece of work across the board, really taking into account a huge number of stakeholders, not only from cities, but also from projects, from adjacent initiatives like the EERA, but also then Living in EU and so on and so forth. So this is how I would see one of the opportunities for the next years to come. The other thing is making it even more purposeful, so that we do not disseminate any piece of information which is not sort of, useful for the creation of projects, following whatever plan. If you look into the EU Green Deal, if you look into, for example, the Covenant of Mayors, just coming to my mind, the SECAPs there, which are local plans with a lot of commitment on political end. So the gap which is there is we have a lot of political support on one hand, a lot of commitment really, a lot of also local buy-in into that plan very often. But then on the other hand, what's missing is how to really translate these plans into a sustainable long-term action plan or roadmap. And this is, I believe, where the marketplace can kick in, helping with really hands-on advisory on how to set these projects up. And I think it's not about implementing a plan as a whole, but defining steps which lead to its very implementation or very realization. And that can be small steps also. It can also be non-technical steps. Because we are always talking about sustainability, implementation, and all these things, but it's also the small steps which count, which make smaller towns and cities ready for the process. So it's not all about technology. It's also about knowing what your respective city society needs. So what is the actual need? Is it like, you might find that in some circumstances you look first into the renovation of a district heating and cooling system, for example. In other circumstances, you look into finally getting this mobility ticketing system running, so that people are more inclined to, to take the bus instead of their individual cars in the city context, and so on. So there might be a multitude of actions, and I think the Smart Cities Marketplace, and here I will stop because I'm eating too much time, I see. The Smart Cities Marketplace is there to really put the needed info at the fingertips of those ones who want to implement these projects. And then in the wider sense, on the big picture, this would of course contribute not only to the Green Deal, it would also contribute to the mission on cities and to other, let's say, EU level activities, like for example, the renovation wave or Bauhaus. And here I stop.
Thank you, Georg. Actually, because there's also been discussions to see whether the Smart City Guidance Package could be updated with, the recent movement there's been on the new European Bauhaus, if that wouldn't be a logical next step. Those types of discussions are ongoing, of course, and we hope that this session can contribute to making that happen. With these types of connections, so I would like to turn to Lucienne. When you had your Slido exercise on market uptake, we got some surprising answers linking, or maybe not so surprising, but linking to transparency, heart and soul, which connects really nicely with the previous discussion. Do you have some reflections on this? So what do you think about this? How would it influence the way you work, or some priorities you have?
I think the influence is already there, but it could be stronger. And just getting back to the one-stop shop approach, the One Duurzaam and the EOS, both focus very much on customer intimacy, knowing their customers. They did also some social sciences research, and they worked together with those social sciences. And transparency was one of the items that came on top of the list most often. It was transparency, trustworthiness, credibility, getting the reliable information. So there's a general distrust in the information that is out there, what to choose, because there's so many possibilities. So people want to be helped and to want to trust what they choose and that it will be delivered. So what they do is start communication very early on, get all the inhabitants, especially with apartment buildings, on board very early on, guide them to choose what are the trade-offs if you choose for one option or another option, because there are always multiple options. And very important, the performance guarantee in the end, and a kind of an inquiry in the end. What is your feedback? How the process went? How can we improve our communication? They really want to have a long-term relationship, and this long-term relationship is coming back. There's more and more of this service-oriented startups. Product-oriented, a bit less, but service-oriented, where customer intimacy is key. It's one of the main items.
Yes, thank you. And I saw a question in the chat on digitalization, so digital tools and citizen communication. I think it fits very nicely with what you just said, because maybe, well, hopefully these digital tools could also help to support the early communication, the information you can find, you know, getting guarantees, viability, building a long-term relationship. They could boost it, they could also destroy it, of course. So, you know, it depends on how you use them. Do you have any experience do you see a difference when you use digital tools to well, in what you just said?
Yeah, there's a balance. And it's not that easy to find the right balance, because, well, the advantage of all the digital tools is, of course, you have scale, and people can fill it out at any moment, everywhere, whenever they feel like it, stop it, etc. But what we see is that especially the face-to-face contact is really essential. If you decide on really a big moment in your life, the renovation of your house, you really want to have a face to look at and be a person to talk to, and if there's a problem, who to call. So that there's a balance. So and especially during the COVID times, we saw that it's becoming more and more important, the video connection. But now everyone is allowed to travel again, and it's back to face, because it's a huge decision and you want to have a person in front of you. So a trade-off, I'm sorry, there's not a clear answer.
Well, balance is always a good answer, I think. Adel, I've been meaning to ask you, so in the first presentation by Georg, you know, on the drivers, and Georg already of course, commented on it as well. So you have the drivers, you know, you have the cities, you have the financing community, you have industry, society, and then research as a blue cloud on the side, as you know, providing information, etc. So in a different type of role, and of course that has always, you know, very often traditionally been the case. Now it struck me a bit. With the white paper that you present and, you know, the work you've been doing, that seems to pull a research alliance like EERA into a different role. I'm not sure if it's a new role, but maybe, you know, working more towards policy uptake, more towards societal impact, not just doing the research, but making sure it gets used, so not just publishing it, but doing something more with it. Could you comment on that?
Well, thank you, Annemie, for the question, and I can assure you this was not prepared. But I think it's indeed a very interesting question, because what we noted basically is that there was, you know, when the set plan was created 12 or 13 years ago, it was about creating a leadership on low carbon technologies, which at the time were not competitive. Now, a couple of them are highly competitive, but this hasn't changed really the picture dramatically. If you look at globally, you know, the situation in terms of primary energy mix, you see that, you know, we're still running pretty much as before. And so from there, we took the analysis of this is that in order for the technologies really to make the difference, they need to be really integrated within a global societal transformation. And so we see very much a role of the research community, not only to bring, you know, a set of technologies to competitiveness and then full stop, but rather to accompany really or to support the overall process of the uptake of these technologies, which includes much more, because it's about changing some of the market models, it's about changing regulations, it's about it's about technology adoption by the citizen. And maybe a subject that I didn't mention for the sake of time is one of the elements we see very important in the transition is that somewhere there would be a narrative that you know, any citizen could relate himself to a storyline and project himself in the future with, you know, a new environment, because we're going to change quite significantly our way of living. And so if you could provide, you know, a sense to anyone of what is the future and how he or she could relate to the future, this will drive the transition much more than a push from the technology side. And I think that the research community has a very important role in if not designing this, at least contributing and pushing for this narrative to well, to exist and to be constructed.
Yes, thank you very much. If I look at the clock, we have about 3 minutes to wrap up now. So thank you very much for all of your insights and inputs and presentations, and we'll make these also available to the audience. I think that the last thing that was said now is also a kind of nice conclusion from this session. So we have an urgency to move towards climate neutrality, net zero, you know, ideally by 2030, at least many of the cities should be able to reach it then. And it won't be enough just continuing what we are already doing. So we need to change something, we need to accelerate, maybe include additional stakeholders, work more across research, policy, industry, local authorities. And I hope that this discussion can contribute to making that happen. But I liked the last statement of, you know, it's not enough to just push technologies. You have to follow solutions, processes all the way from developing them, looking at what is needed, and then bringing it all the way into society, into integration, into use, into also monitoring how it's used and improving it afterwards. So in a way, very much the journey, the customer journey or the city journey that Lucienne also presented an example of in her presentation. And I think by thinking more about that journey and then where each of our organizations fit in it and how we can cooperate to make that more one, you know, we don't just do each our own bit and then we hope that someone else takes it up, but how do we make it more of a continuous innovation? I need to see what you called it. How can we together, so how can we cooperate to increase that innovation readiness level so that these good examples, you know, Charlotte, you showed a lot of good examples. How can we make sure that these actually reach all of these cities and that the good research ideas actually get translated into such deployed solutions, get tested somewhere, and then again, get innovated and scaled to a level where they can be integrated into a bigger societal and then market context as well. And I see there's some additional chat comments coming in. I think we're storing also all of these so everyone has access to them. But I think so maybe this session also generated more questions and challenges than generating answers. But I think the time is right now to actually ask these questions and to see if there's something we could be doing differently or doing together to accelerate that clean energy transition. The mission, the new European Bauhaus, the platforms, etc. are, of course, wonderful instruments in order to make that happen. So let's try to connect to these and to work together then to see where we can make a difference using the knowledge we already have, not duplicating, but rather just looking at our individual strengths as organizations and seeing how we together then can accelerate the transition. So thank you very much for all your presentations, for your discussions, input, questions. Thank you to all the participants for staying with us through the whole session. And if you in any way would like to connect to this, follow up on it afterwards, if you got some new ideas or you want to organize something to somehow bring some of this forward, please let us know. And we'll try to make that happen, to facilitate the connection and to look for any opportunity to bring this forward. Thank you very much. Also, of course, to our technical hosts, to making all of this run really smoothly. And have a wonderful afternoon and evening. And we hope to see all of you soon, face to face, not only digitally, to continue the discussion and the cooperation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.